Hey, what's good everybody? My name is Alchemy. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about trying to remake aim and breaks inside of Superior Drummer 3. Now, I want to go over a couple of different breaks that I make within this program, and it's kind of important to understand that they have different applications. We're going to be talking about the recreation of the last one here, but yeah, I think that really when it comes down into it, in one way or another, most genres, whether it be drum and bass, breakbeat, jungle, all that other stuff, are some kind of aim in to some extent. And really, what I've been wanting to do was try to figure out how to get as close as possible towards that classic sound, so that way we can use it for stuff like jungle. But there's a few different flavors that I know how to do, and these are just a couple. I've got some trip hop ones as well, but let's take a listen to some of the heavier ones. And then these, on the other hand, are actually a little bit on the lighter side, that are a little bit cleaner and a little bit easier to use. The reason why I want to talk about this is because they kind of fit into a specific format or a specific aesthetic about wanting to make sure that, for one, we don't overcook them, and two, you can use these to get to here if you want to. But let's take a listen to some of the softer ones. Nice. So within these, I think that, if you were to pitch them up and kind of separate them within their respective kind of things, then you can definitely use these for different kinds of jungle and whatnot. And I would encourage you, if you have Superior Drummer, to try to just focus on making your own stuff. But there's a couple of ground rules that I want to lay out. That's not necessarily a rule, but more of a rule of thumb, because at the end of the day, if whatever you're making sounds pretty cool and you like it, then go with that, right? There's not really a right or wrong. However, I am going to introduce you to this template that is a heavily modified version of Noise's Patreon, of how Nick specifically set his up, except I've got a lot of my own tricks and a lot of my own things of what we're doing. Now, for the sake of the length of the video, I'm just going to gloss over this and kind of give you the general idea of what everything is doing, but then I'm going to kind of show you how to control everything, mostly within Superior Drummer, and also just recreate the aim and break in case if you have a different program like Addictive Drums. So if that sounds interesting to you, then please leave a like, leave me a comment, and let me know if you want to see more Superior Drummer stuff. Also, I'm thinking about putting out a course very quickly. I'm thinking about doing a course that will cover the conventional means of the kick, snare, hat, tom, cymbals, overheads, and the ambiances, and then go into some certain styles of how to make loops. If that seems like something that you're interested in, and I can get enough, people that are like, yeah, dude, I totally buy this course, then let me know. So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about what makes this work compared to the other stuff, because I think that generally speaking, I'm not necessarily ultra concerned with like creating the aim and break exactly, but what we do want to create is a shuffle. And generally speaking, a common beat, I guess, pattern, a common pattern of this would be, and so we can kind of just put a snare on the two and kind of do some other stuff here. But before I do any of that, I actually am going to set this to 138 BPM, because actually, let's go half of that, which would be 64. And the reason why is because if this is at a slower tempo and you bounce this out, then when you move it up, it's actually going to preserve the transients. If you do like double time and you slow it down and you don't repitch it, then it's going to lose a lot of the audio quality. That's a trick that I picked up from Scope almost 10 years ago. So in any case, let's go ahead and kind of just dial this in, and then we're going to talk about how to make this come a little bit more alive. So if I were to start with the snare, which I believe is here, that's kind of that. And then before I do anything else as well, I'm actually just going to turn a couple of these on. We'll talk about this later, but it's not really that concerning. This is more of just making sure that this is loud enough to listen to in contrast to my voice. So yeah, snare on the 2 and the 4, pretty standard, which we actually want it to be here, I believe. So we'll do this. The reason why is because we're working at like quarter time almost in some cases. But if we have something like this, this is the easiest way to kind of start something like this, just because we have an anchor. We can talk about shuffle and swing if you want to, and generally speaking, within these anchors, you know, you can do things as making this a little bit more forward if you want to. This will kind of make it drive a little harder. If you want it to be more relaxed like a coastal beat, then you can actually move this a little bit forward. I know that there's no context with the other drums in mind, but this is just like a, hey, quick, you know, 0 to hero thing that you can do. And the faster the tempo, the more that you kind of, or sorry, the less that you want to push this, just because it's going to become more noticeable. So you want to really start to get like granular if you're working at a faster tempo. So a lot of people would probably go for the kicks now. I actually don't want to do that. I want to talk about the hat patterns and the rides. In a typical aim and break, I think for the most part, there's only a ride, and that's what we're going to start with. So if we go to an aim in, just listen to this. That shuffling sound right there, that is actually a ride cymbal, or it's an open hat, but to me it sounds like some kind of mixture between that. One thing that's really cool about Superior Drummer, because I know that we haven't really talked about this before, I know that we're just going on the pattern, is that, I get, sorry, there's so much to cover. There are a ton of drums in here, even if you don't have any expansions. And so right now you're looking at this and you're like, wait, there's only 2, or there's this, and then there's this. But if you go to more, and then you go to add to, or there should be another thing here, search for instrument. I'm sorry, it's right here in front of us. And you type in rides. Look at how much more there are available. And this is only within, I think anyways, within a specific category, cymbal, ride, sticks. So if you were to type this in or do the search function here, I think that there's actually more. So maybe not. Okay, so, but even still, if we look at things like hats, and we go clear all, and then we go hat, there's actually a lot more of these available. And then when we get into like kicks and snares and stuff, and so if you're trying to find the right one for the getting the groove, and we're not trying to create it necessarily exact, but trying to find that right groove, then there's that. For me personally, this is the one that I think sounds the closest, which is the HHX dry ride. But I would encourage you to experiment and try different stuff. So the reason why I wanted to tell you that was because one of the biggest things with this is trying to get the ride groove before we even get to the kick snare pattern, because it's going a and because of that, we want to try to land that first, because that serves as the veil over the rest of the drum kit. Believe it or not, the kicks and snares and stuff are great, but that actual little like kind of washing pattern is the reason why this sounds so good for me anyways. See that? It kind of gives that really nice top end splash, and the other stuff after that becomes a lot easier. So let's go ahead and figure out where our ride is. I haven't memorized this, but we're just going to wait until this goes into the ride, and then I'll talk about routing after we make the pattern. All right, where are you at? Sorry, we're going to just kind of go through this. Actually, what I'll do is this. There it is. So what I can also do is I can pull this up and see where that's routed to. So this guy right here. And so let's go ahead and go to search for instrument and put another ride here. And the reason why we're going to do this is because we're going to route it to a different mic in a second, but I'll talk about that here in a little bit. So let's just grab a ride. Let's go for that XX dry, and then we'll go replace cymbal. Cool. Now that we have that, we can start to create a pattern over this in relationship to the snare. So if I fold this and we go here, then we can start to drag this and create something kind of like this. So the next piece of this right here is fine, but it sounds a little bit dry, right? Or it sounds a little bit kind of boring. And so when we create a shuffle like this, all we really have to do is a couple of things. One is we're going to manipulate the timing, and it doesn't need to be perfect, but we're just going to make this a little bit unnatural. or sorry, a little bit more natural rather. And then what I'm going to do is grab these two, and we're just going to adjust this kind of like so. And you can even make this one different if you want to. But when you do that, and this is a little bit off, it helps create a little bit more of a groove. So see? Now the next piece of this is, as you can hear, this is ringing out quite a bit, and that's all nice and fun, but the problem with it is that it's too long. And so what we're going to do is we're going to come over to this guy right here, make sure that this is highlighted, whatever ride you decide to use, and we're going to come to the envelope and offset and just move this until it's a little bit closer, and take a listen to it now. All right, so obviously that's way too much, so we can kind of push this a little bit forward now. What we can also do is change the tuning as well. You see how that's a little bit nicer now? Sweet. So now what we're going to do is come back over here and we're going to go to C1, which is the kick. Because within this now, we can start to create a kick pattern, which is pretty much... And then now from here, this is kind of get into the second piece of the shuffling part, so where we're going to use stick hits and snares in order to create the middle part. And to me, this is the most important part, because a lot of times when people are looking for breaks, they're looking for the shuffle that I'm getting ready to introduce. And what we're going to do is we're going to create it more with the snares and stick hits than anything else, but you can always replace this with other stuff, and we can talk about that whenever we're making drum and bass and stuff. But for now, let's go ahead and just turn this off, because I want to focus on just what we're going to be doing with the snares. But we're going to go create a dotted rhythm here and change this, and maybe even change the snare intonation. So as you can hear, there's different versions of this that all sound different, and they are also going to sound different if we're changing the velocity. But take a listen to this. And so what we need to do is create, a couple of these. And now if you listen to this, we kind of have something that's a little bit more of a roll. Boom, boom. So now within this, this doesn't really matter where it's placed, but whenever we're working on this, just trying to create a shuffle here within this section, and you can also create a relationship with the hi-hats and stuff, but really all we're trying to do is get this to roll a little bit. So and now that we have that, we can introduce the rides again, and hopefully that will help us create another kind of thing here that will create a call and response between these two, or just an interaction rather. So and then what we can also do is grab these and start to change these snares around to create now we're starting to get it to roll. And so what we can do is go do this 3 times, and then we're going to create a little kind of like fill on the last bar here. So having a pattern of 3 is totally fine, and if you want to, you can kind of switch each one, because we're doing this with the purpose of wanting to resample. But whenever we have a turnaround or something of the sort, then we can kind of change it a bit. And so usually it's boom 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 boom. So we can kind of create that. We can go, you know, you can do something like that for sure, but I don't remember what exactly the pattern was, but that's okay. But let's just go ahead and kind of veer off the path for now because I don't want to reference this too hard. But what I will do is we will create a different kind of shuffle. So I think it's boomed, boomed, boomed. So it's something kind of like that. But really, whenever we're trying to kind of create something like this, you can do whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. So we can go. We can even move the snare off if we want to. So. You know, or. And then from here, we can kind of also veer off some of the other things as well. And now that we have some of the basics down, this is kind of how we get into changing it and thinking for ourselves for what we want. I do think that it's important to reference and to try to understand, you know, like what makes it what it is. But once we kind of have an idea of that, then it's going to be kind of up to us to make those changes, you know? Like it might be kind of cool to put a crash right there. And the other thing that I will say is that typically speaking, you have, you know, unless if you're an octopus or something, you have 2 arms and 2 legs. And if you're trying to create something that is relatively realistic, then remember that, and you don't need to be a pro at drumming, but remember that you can, like a person can only hit so many things at one time. Let's say a kick with the right foot, a hat that's open and closing with the left leg, then you have another hat slash ride or splash with the left hand or the right hand, doesn't matter depending on, you know, how you do that. And then you have something that controls the snare. And when it comes into syncopation, you can, in theory, fit as many beats or whatever as you want in between. But if you're playing 5 crashes at a time along with a snare and a double kick, it's not going to make much sense. Now, can you do it? In the electronic world, absolutely. And should you explore that at some point? Yeah, for sure. But generally speaking, a lot of what makes this work is actually maintaining that sense of simplicity. When we get into the layering of jungle and breaks and stuff, it changes it a little bit differently, because a lot of times what we do is we create a shuffle that is layered over this, but the main part, the main break with this, right? This is like the core. This is the concept, or the main aspect that we use as the foundation of building a jungle track or something that, or even a breakbeat track. And so we don't want to make it too complicated. And if you notice, I haven't even talked about processing or anything yet, because I don't really think that it's all that important when you're doing this stage. Sans just some very simple stuff, which I'll walk you through what this is here in a second. The most important part, though, is trying to get a ride groove, and also trying to get that snare fill groove, or those ghost snares. And once you kind of have that, then you could be like, or you could be like, or you can be like, and when you get to the chopping board, whenever we bounce this out as a loop, it's also going to be relatively inconsequential. It's just a matter about how to get that groove. And one other thing that you may or may not have noticed that I didn't mention, but I'll mention it now, is that I've turned the groove, or the overall groove, off. So we're not using any swing or anything. We did this all kind of by hand. I prefer to do it that way, because when you start to use something like a swing adjuster or a humanize adjuster, It just never feels right. I'd much rather just create some stuff that is kind of like this with a little bit of off, a little bit of off. And this is also a great introduction to getting into like halftime and like coastal beats, like West and East Coast of like, because that's really like my world of the kind of beats that I like to make anyways. But taking that and using that extreme and then dialing it back has helped teach me a lot about how to get a tighter groove for faster music, because even though this is at 64, I think the original Amen was at this says 137, but I think that it's like a known thing to be at like 138, right? Remember too that the stuff that we're applying can also be used for different kinds of breaks, right? The what is it? The Apache break, the Think break, the Control break, all of this stuff should be things that you can explore and try to break down. But if you listen to a lot of these, they're a lot more simple than you think. You don't have to go crazy. Now, once we have this, then this is kind of like off to the races, because we really just needed to get the pattern down. And when you have the pattern, hell, if you're having an issue with the pattern, you could literally go online and look up the MIDI if you wanted to. I think that I have an actual thing here that's, yeah, Alchemy's Amen. So if you wanted a true recreation of this, I think that this is pretty close, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so maybe within this, I think that I have another. Yeah, so the only thing with this is that the MIDI isn't mapped correctly, and so these need to be on the rides and stuff. But when we look at the final thing here with the kicks, you know what I mean? It's different stuff. I have tons and tons of breaks on here. So, you know, head honcho break. Let's take a look at this. You know, easy break. One of these is actually the classic recreation. It's a little bit slower. Right? Drum funk break 9000. So, you know, create your own stuff. Look at how many breaks I have, you know? Let me see what this one is. I don't know if we looked at this one yet or not, but see how it's got that really nice, you know, it's got that nice ride overhead. And so that's kind of what we're looking for whenever it comes into this kind of thing. So case in point, now let's go ahead and back up a bit. And now that we have the pattern, we're going to talk about some of the more technical things inside of Superior Drummer. So what I want to do is we're going to go straight to the mixer here, and I want to show you what's going on here. So in order to get something like this with what I'm doing, I, for one, am clicking on the double arrows here in Bitwig, and your DAW is going to be something different. But because Superior Drummer supports multi-out, we kind of want to build a template to where we can do that. So if we look at the first thing, which is kick in, out, and sub, this is everything that makes up the kicks. And so what I've done is send those all to output 1 and 2. Everything that's the snares, 3 and 4. The hi-hat, 5 and 6. The toms, 7, 8. All of the toms. There is no floor tom that I use, so that's just 1 and 2. The overhead dynamics are 9 and 10. Condensers, 11, 12. Ambient ribbons, ribbon near, all that stuff. So if you notice here, I don't actually have any effects on here. And the very first video that I ever did on YouTube 7 years ago, I do go through this, but I prefer to just use my own plugins. But absolutely, you can use the built-in plugins and stuff. I just have a couple of preferences that I would prefer. Some other things that are really important with getting that dry sound is if you look at these different mics over here, you'll notice that on the bleed instruments for these mics, there's none. Everything is dry. We go to the snares, everything is dry. Snare bottom. Okay, so this has a little bit of stuff from rack tom 2 and 3, but because I almost never use toms anyways, you never hear it. Cymbals, dry. Toms, we'll skip over that. Then we have the overheads that everything is being sent to this. Condenser. I don't think that we're actually using the condenser. We're not actually using this one. I think we're just using the dynamics. So we have the ribbon, which I believe is all Also overheads, so all of the toms and the cymbals. Ambient snare, everything. All of the main kit, rather. And then this stuff is off for the most part. So if we hit play, you'll see that we were only using these guys. You absolutely can route stuff to different mics, and we can talk about that as a more advanced video. But the reason why I wanted to show you this is because this is the gateway to giving you individual control for what's going on. So long story short, if I were to unsolo all of this, you're only going to hear the kick on channel 1 and 2, right? And so because of that, 3 and 4, snare, 5 and 6, hats, 7 and 8, toms, 9 and 10, overheads, 11, 12, ambiances, right? And so for me, I've kind of just gone and taken the audio receiver from that to set that up. I'll do a more in-depth video on this in the future if this video has any kind of interest or any kind of traction whatsoever. So by nature, as you can hear, this is very quiet. So with all of the processing turned off on this stuff, other than this, let me turn just about everything off. Effect layer. Okay, cool. All right. So yeah, everything on this is just is very quiet. If we were to do the same thing with addictive drums, they would probably be at least 6 or so dB louder. But the benefit of this is that it makes it very malleable and you can do a lot with it. I wanted to reiterate from before that with making drums like this, having a clean break is generally more useful because you can kind of mold it into more genres and more, it's more versatile. If you want to like just go balls to the wall ham with distortion and all that, you absolutely can. But the only thing that I do want to do is try to make it just a little bit tighter and bring it up just a little bit more. And that's why I've chosen these effects in order to do that. This is just a mono check if I want to. It's kind of insignificant. We will keep the oscilloscope on, but I'm going to group this and we're just going to kind of walk through what I would normally do. So generally speaking, within breaks, drums in general, I find that for my style of music, for my style of mix rather, with when it comes into drums and stuff, hold on, I have a jungle thing that is relatively recent somewhere. We'll just kind of listen to the first few seconds of that. I tend to try to make my drums relatively loud. And the reason why I make my drums loud is because, well, I like loud drums. So you know, just something kind of like that. Whatever drums we make are not necessarily going to sound like that, but let's make them a little bit louder so that way they can kind of compete with whatever volume that was. So first off, what I want to do is add a soft clipper to this, and we're going to use Over. This is the Bitwig standard. I love this thing because it sounds really good and it's almost as transparent as Newfangled Saturate. This was the best addition that Bitwig has added in like years. So let's take a listen to this. You can see that the snare is peaking a little bit, but we're not really worried about that because, as you can see, there's so many peaks on this, we can actually crush this pretty hard. So if we pull this up by like, hell, even 4 dB, it's probably still going to stay intact. Yep, it's fine. We still have a crest factor, meaning that it still has dynamics maintained, and we can actually push this harder if we want to. Before we get into actually making this louder though, I'm going to talk about some of the other options that we have. The first thing that I'm going to do is a transient control, and I'm just going to listen to this. Actually, let me turn this back up so I can listen to this on a louder volume, and then we can dial in how tight we want this to be. So just a little bit. This actually says 32%. How far does this go? Okay, so that goes all the way to minus 200%. But what you want to do in order to make this tighter is pull this down on the gain and then adjust the time. Nice. So within this, you can add more transient and more attack if you want to. Nobody ever really talked to me about this, but something that I think is super... Oh, sorry, baby. Sorry, my dog was just snuck up on me, is that you only really want to push this maybe by like 10%, because once you go past that, it actually tends to become sharp on the transients. So giving this just a little bit, and obviously like if your drums are just ass, like a transient shaper is not going to save them. That's something that I also wish somebody would have told me. A lot of times when it comes into kicks and snares and developments and stuff, there are certain aspects to where the transient needs to already have something that the transient control or a transient shaper can bite off of. But if it's just flabby from the get-go, you're better off using other methods to do that. I've got lots of drum tutorials and talking about that kind of stuff. But if it already has a decent, you know, little peak, then this can really latch onto it and give it a little bit more punch. Nice. That's pretty good. So the only other thing that I would say with this that I'm going to try to bring up before the other stuff is I'm noticing that the kick and the snare are much louder than the cymbals. And so all I'm going to do on this is a couple of things you can. For one, I have a sidechain on this. I'm actually going to turn it off and listen to this. Yeah, we don't need that. And then I'm actually going to adjust the ride to be a little bit louder as well, because I still want that cloud of sound. Cool. So this ride is not perfect, but as you can tell, this is like the one thing that, or like the biggest thing that I feel like is missing, and or like the missing link behind tying everything together to making it seem like it's, you know what I mean, kind of giving that wall of sound that kind of helps create that groove. This is a really important thing, and so there are a couple of options that we can branch off into this with. For example, if I wanted to make it a little bit noisier, then I can add quite a few things actually, but I'm going to add a ring mod for now, and we are going to hit Command G and create a parallel chain. Within this, I'm going to use the bandpass noise, and I'm just going to let you listen to this on its own, but on the bandpass noise, you can also use the low pass noise. It doesn't matter. Take a listen. It's just going to be white noise. Let's just listen to... See how that's a little bit louder, or that's just straight up noise. And so because of that, what we can do is apply some distortion to it. And maybe what I'll do is reduce the transients on it. So now we can kind of play with trying to boost this up and making it a little bit louder without it being too sharp on the transients. Because remember, we're going to try to mix this in with the original signal. Something else that you can play with is a frequency shifter. Doesn't always work, but sometimes it could be nice. To me, that sounds a little bit more complete and a little bit more like it's actually blending in now. And that's a big part of it, you know? So if you've got these hats and maybe you've got the placement of the MIDI, sometimes it's just a matter of like, yo, my cymbals aren't loud enough, or they're too loud, or, you know, there's some kind of aspect to it that's just kind of like, all right, whatever. This might not seem like it's going to make sense, but whenever we start cutting this up as a loop, that's when it's going to become a lot more alive. So with this, on our actual drum bus, we've got clipping and transient control. And then the only other thing that we've done to kind of remind you of what's going on is a parallel ring mod. You might ask the question, why don't I just do this at 50% as opposed to creating a group? And that's because I wanted to distort this and transient control it different. And the other thing is, I like, if I'm ever doing anything spatial, reverb, chorus, maybe not chorus, but reverb specifically, or delay, sometimes just having another channel like this and not touching the main signal can work a lot better. Not always, but it's just some tips that I've picked up over the years. I don't claim to be an expert on this. I just claim to have put thousands of hours into it. So the next thing is, and then we're kind of working backwards, but it's okay. We are going to use, or we're going to experiment with some OTT. Let's go ahead and try the fuse compressor. And you'll notice that I am kind of recreating pretty much this, but there's a method to my madness, because what I want to pull out of this now is have a little bit more high-end energy. If we take a listen to what's happening on this, and I turn off the, this is because there's a noise floor on one of the filters that I have, and that's not technically, that's totally optional. But if I turn this off and we take a listen to what's going on here, it's not bad. It's actually pretty even. Some things that you might want to pay attention to, obviously the kick is over here, the snare is over here, is kind of the mid-highs right here. And this can really shape the character of your break. So if I focus on this area around like 1K, see how it kind of brings up some of those metallic things? And if you're working on a clap or you're working on a snappy or transient that has more of like a smack, this would be a really key area to pay attention to. Let's go ahead and give this a little boost and listen to what that sounds like. See how this just, to me anyways, it just gives it a little bit of excitement. And it's not that much. It's just a 3 dB boost. But I really like the way that that sounds. And so because of that, that's a consideration that you can use if you don't want to use a fuse compressor. We might not even need to use this, to be honest, but let's just throw this on here and figure out what this is. I'm using 6 bands. You can use the multi-band dynamics if you're in Ableton. It doesn't really matter. The one thing is that instead of this being left and right, this is up and down. So this is pretty much everything is being directed towards this middle signal here. And so if, let's pretend like there's a level. If the level is below this, you can decide whether it pushes it up or pushes it down. If it's above this level, you can decide whether it pushes it up, pushes it down. Rather than mess with all of that, that's just pretty much how upwards and downwards compression goes. But, and then I guess right here it's untouched, but yeah. So what I would do is just kind of a long attack, long release, or kind of a mid attack, like 30 seconds mid release. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to push both of these up a little bit. So this is the downward, we're going to push the threshold up. Then we're going to take the upwards and push this up. And what this is going to do is kind of just create a tighter squash at a higher level. And let's just take a listen to what that sounds like now. Not bad, right? So if I were to turn this off with everything, then we turn it back on. Did you notice that I just adjusted the sustain down just a little bit and then pushed these down, and how much of a difference that made? And again, there's not really a right or wrong, but I want you to be aware of the conversations that I'm having whenever I'm trying to make drums like this. So that way you can kind of help figure out how you want to control yours, right? Please don't try to copy this. And if you have Superior Drummer and you don't have Bitwig, or, you know, even if you do have Bitwig, but you don't have my plugins, please, the number one thing that I want you to take away from this is that you don't need the same plugins that I do. You can totally use Extra Records OTT. You're just going to have to spend some time with it and figure out how to kind of navigate to the same thing. If you can't get a similar sound, I mean this in the nicest way, but it is very likely that it's a skill issue, or there's like, you know, a puzzle piece that you're missing, as opposed to, oh man, I have to go spend money and whatever. Because in my experience, I've been that person. I've done that where I've bought the same exact plugins as these other people and still couldn't recreate whatever it is that I'm doing. So that's just, you know, alchemy trying to save you some money. Lol. Okay. So with that being said, I have a tendency to want to push this even harder, but I'm going to back off just a little bit. And the reason why is because, like I said before, I want these to maintain a similar level of loudness. And one comparison that we can do is we can say, okay, let's go back to the Amen. Let's just find one that's like kind of usable. Sure. And we can pull this to the outside here. And let's listen to how loud this is on its own, because we don't have any external processing going on this. I know that all of these are on. Well, now it's on, but I want to listen to how loud this is without doing anything to it. Let's just set this to raw. So that's actually at like -9. And so if we wanted to kind of create a break that was in a similar loudness, we can actually kind of do that. I don't know, I'm kind of torn in between. But if you wanted to kind of have something that's relatively similar in that way, then that's something that you can do. Now, obviously, this is a different recording. This has obviously been processed, and we're going to do the second piece of this, which I'll talk about in just a second. But if you notice, they're pitched up, they're a lot dirtier, you know, there's certain things with that. But keep in mind that there's a lot of different styles of the Amen break, because there's like, what, 50 years, 60 years of this being done over and over again. So that this is just one expression of it, right? Don't be like, oh, it's not the same. You know, create your own version. Just try to get the basics correct with having good transient sounds and a live drum kit. Which I guess kind of bouncing back and forth on this stuff. I know that I didn't really go through the kit much. It's not really important. This is kind of just some basic stuff with this. You can literally just swap these out and listen to how it sounds. It doesn't matter to me. I will say that the Gresh snares, I think, did I say that correctly? Yeah, the Gresh snares, those usually have more of those like trash can metallic ringing sounds to them. But look how many snares are in here, you know? I do have the kicks and snares expansion, but even without them, there's still like just so many sounds that you can get through. Let's just pull up a different Gresh snare and just see what that sounds like. Because again, actually, let's just do any snare. It doesn't matter. Okay. Something that you might want to consider is you might want to do something like this, which is just changing the tuning of the pitch of the snare. So yeah, doesn't matter. That one sounds pretty cool. So with this one, maybe what I will do is just pitch this up by like 2 semitones-ish. Sweet. And then we have ourselves a drum break that we can kind of get into and start processing. You'll notice that I didn't do any layering to this. Within these individual sounds, the reason why I turned this off is because I actually do have layers to this that will create an electronic sound if I want it to. Or a transient shaper within this replacer here, there's a kick that's buried within this. So if we just focus on the kick, so then it will actually create an electronic sound, but we're muting that and turning this off because right now we're just leaving this to be clean. And whenever you're doing this and you break this into an actual jungle project or a breakbeat track or whatever, again, we're saying jungle or breakbeat or like, you know, more chill drum and bass because these sounds are relatively clean. We're not doing like the heavy stuff that I did from before. We want to focus on just having something that has enough weight to where it provides a little bit of I guess I don't really know how else to say that. A little bit of weight to the track, but isn't so overbearing that it's not like. That's going to be for a different time if I do a video on how to make those kinds of drums. And if you already know how to do like drum processing and stuff, then like you're probably good to go. Just take any of this stuff and then be like, I'm going to process the crap out of this kick and then make the drum break with that. So yeah, this is what we have. And of course, like every time I listen to it, I want to make small little adjustments or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's not really going to matter. It's more of just a means of, okay, now that you have this, take this pattern, completely change the kit, bounce it out again, see what that sounds like. I have one of the greatest tools ever invented for music production called Rolling Sampler. It's the best 20 bucks I've ever spent. I know that Superior Drummer is expensive, but I guarantee, like, if you don't have Superior Drummer, just get this because the fact of the matter, or the truth of the matter is that, for one, amen breaks are a dime a dozen. You know, it almost doesn't even make sense why somebody would want to try to recreate this. At the same time, the rolling sampler capabilities and the cool stuff that you can do with this is just immense. And for me, this is a staple. This is something that I personally am like, I can't believe that I ever did music production without this. If I told you to get one plugin, it would be this one. I know that I just had that conversation about don't buy my plugins. This is the one exception. So let's go ahead and record this. Sweet. And now what we can do is we can just drag this out and we have this recording here. Unfortunately, it didn't clip it right where the transient starts, but I can fix that later. But now what we're going to do is we are going to drag this over here and we are going to change the tempo of this to, say, I don't know, 85, 82, 80, you know, something that's more in the jungle territory. And the trick to this is to double click on this and we're going to change this into repitch mode and see what this sounds like. Sick. And so within this now, as you can listen to it, there's lots of different options that we can use. The reason why I changed it to repitch mode is because it does the best job at maintaining the transients. However, we can do something to where we just go to stretch HD, and then because we're playing this faster, it should do an okay job, but we can pitch this to whatever we want to do. Let's say like 4 semitones. Right? Which is pretty sick. And so because of this now, we can get to the chopping board with all this other stuff and start to, you know, apply some other processing or cut it up. So we could kind of cut this in this way and do certain things like this. So we can swap this and just take this phrase. Boom, boom, boom. So and really just kind of start having fun with cutting this up in the way that we want. And the cool thing that I was talking about from before is that we can take those chops, kind of like so, and start to fit them in here to help provide filling in the gap. So you know, and then within this stuff, you can kind of just change it to whatever it is that you want it to be as far as creating a drum break. A lot of times, one of my favorite ones are the, you know, so the, we can go not with that one, but we can go, so we will take this and go kind of like this, and then grab that snare. And then that's kind of nice as well. And just kind of having something like this to be able to cut it up. Now within this, sometimes what you have to do a little bit is work for the shuffle. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to find one of those smaller snares here. And so with this little guy, you don't have to like make it perfect for one. I think that's really important. It doesn't have to be like, you know, wait, what was I going out? I was going on with something about that. But yeah, it doesn't have to be like everything is the same pitch. Like we can actually take something like this and pitch this up and then also make it really short and techy. Sorry, I knew I had a point to that. But listen to how we're going to create a different shuffle with this now. So, well, that was a little bit too fast. So now what we will try instead is we will make this twice as long and see if we can do it like that. So we'll just kind of do this. There we go. So now check this out. Yeah. Then we can also change other aspects of this too, you know. So if we want to make the rides or everything else a little bit different, we can totally do that. If we want this to be a little bit heavier, because I know that this is so dry that everything is really short and really tight and techy, sometimes you might actually want that. And that's one thing that I wanted to mention of what makes the aim and break so iconic is that ride cymbal really helps give it that like. And so when you're doing the design process with this other stuff, like what we were doing from before, really focusing on the rides because that's what it is, and just trying to pull out that almost like it's a ride, but it almost sounds like a crash. Um, yeah, it's just that weird, almost like I don't want to say glassy, but it almost sounds like just China clashing with other symbols and stuff, kind of with that. But yeah, it's a ride. I've listened to this a billion times, but yeah. So with that being said, the next piece of this would be to either start to look at your layering. So one thing that we could do, because I have some other stuff in here, is to go into this sample pack that I just put out. And what I'm going to say is that I'm just going to fish for it here. But what I have done is I've made it inside of this. But what we're doing is just making really, really tiny short transients of this. You know what? Let's just do it this way because I'm not really trying to sell you on anything unless if you just want the sounds, which is totally fine. But if we were to do something like this where we go super short, take a listen to this. That's pretty good, but we want more. It's pretty good, but we want more. Not bad. So we can also kind of change this into a lot of different things that will provide a lot of timbre or a lot of quality changes for us. For some reason, this is only pulling up Bitwig stuff. I'm going to see it one more time. Frequency shifter. There we go. I don't know. Sometimes that just gets stuck in there. But if we were to do something like this, lol. Nice. That sounds pretty good. We can also kind of make it a little bit more noisy by grabbing a ring mod. And see, that sounds really nice now. So let's go ahead and clip this again. That sound right there is coming just from one of the drum sounds has a tail in it, but let's go ahead and record that out. And the cool thing about this is that when we pull this out, we don't have to use the whole thing. But what we will do with this is just find a small interaction here. And I will just take something kind of like this, maybe even the first two, kind of like so, and just listen to this. And look what happens whenever we double this and then create that shuffle. We don't have to get rid of this, but we'll just move it over to the side. But check this out. Oh, that sounds kind of like, hold on. You have DMB rough connections. So while I went the extreme and made this really tight, this is one way that you can make those kinds of shuffles. And if you want to add some variation to it, then you can change it up on like every other one or whatever. So we can do something kind of like this. And now if we take a listen to this, you can play with the pitching of it. Doesn't really matter, and to the degree of how malleable you want these to be would just depend on how tight you want these transients and how much you pretty much want to gate them. You absolutely can use a gate. I tend to, I do this in a lot of different ways. There's not really a right or wrong, but I'm just kind of trying to show you an example about how to build and how to layer with this stuff. Because while this is kind of, soft on its own with these drums, whenever we add the shuffle now, it's kind of coming together, and then that's when you can add some stuff kind of like some other things. And this is where I was talking about with being able to go outside of the spectrum of playing the patterns and stuff, not necessarily like a real drummer. We just need to make sure that everything blends in the correct way. You'll also notice that I haven't broken everything up yet to like its own kicks and snares and whatever. And typically speaking, I don't worry about that until I've already got a concept going, just because I'm like focusing and trying to get to the vibe first. So this is just sketching. It doesn't really take that much effort to kind of break everything up. If you wanted to and you have some kind of stem separator or whatever, you can do that as well. Lots of different ways to skin that cat, but try not to get too caught up in it because it's relatively like, well, sorry, it's irrelevant until the later stages when you're really trying to get down on controlling the mix. So some other stuff that we can do is we can kind of take a look at some of this stuff. And sometimes within this, we can create, other things that help provide the veil of the noise, right? So if I were to just add in these crashes here, kind of like so, and then I just turn one down to where it's loud and then quiet and then loud and then quiet, we can kind of see if we can blend this in. Not too bad. Let's go ahead and take out the high end of this, or the low end rather. See how you can barely even hear it? You're right. So within that, that's kind of where you can get into the other stuff now. If the snare needs to change or whatever, then that's totally fine. You can get into your layering, and sometimes having multiple breaks can be helpful. For whatever reason, if you're like, okay, this is cool, but it needs a little bit more, you can find some other snares and stuff to be like, something kind of like this, and see if you can make this work. So we can go like this, go here, then here, and then here, and then there. We can leave the ghosts alone and just look at the big ones. So kind of like this. And then once you kind of have everything together, that's kind of where it's usually a good idea to start getting into like your, room reverbs and stuff, because that's kind of how you can kind of tie it all together. I don't know. I said something right there. That was lots of kindas in there, but that's what we're looking at. And I have to throw those in there because it's not, I'm trying to leave this open for subjectivity. I'm adding just a little bit of clipping to this. We're going to use something like Valhalla Room. And right now I'm just going to leave this at 100% mix. We're going to take out that kick. And now that we have this, we're going to grab both of these. Just turn it down. Yeah. And so this is just one way that you can start to create, some drum breaks and stuff that sound not the heaviest again. If you want to make them heavy, then from the beginning, like from the genesis, we want to go harder with this stuff. But if you're trying to make them relatively clean, then you can really make some of your own unique sounds with this to try to get some cool, fresh sounding things. And if you want them to sound a little bit older, there are a couple of tricks that you can do as well. Like for one, if we go back to the original drum groove here, and you were to do something like, I use Wolf compressor, but you can do any kind of like tape stuff. But let's just throw this on here and make this a little bit dirtier to where I'm going to apply the lo-fi and a little bit of compression on here. But take a listen to this now. Wait, let's do it without it first. Oh, let's also do this, and sorry, this, turn this back on. Yeah, and so if you've got something that's like really boomy and subby like that, and you're trying to like crush it, then you can always just pull. See how much more of a difference this makes now? And it's not necessarily even the Wolf compressor, it's adding compression to it, which is kind of crushing the dynamics a little bit more, but the lo-fi slash the wow. And so I'm trying to think if I have anything else, like isotope vinyl. Do I even have that? I do, technically. I don't know if we can get a similar sound from this, but we can try. We are going to turn off the dust. And then the warping is kind of what we want to add. We can kind of lo-fi this just a little bit. And then let's see if we can make this on older RPM. Probably like 45, I'd imagine. And let's go 1970-ish. I don't know. It doesn't need to be perfect. Let's just see what it sounds like. Different flavor, but yeah. If we wanted to kind of add in that low ends, then we can use a compressor. I'm going to use the glue for this. But what we would do, I'm going to turn this off for a hot sec, is kind of the same deal. We got a 30 millisecond attack, 1.2 second release, and 10-second ratio. And I usually shoot for about here, just as a point of reference, just because I think it sounds good in that region. There we go. So it's kind of floating around there. And then what we can do is so just from the compression alone, and this is what this can do for you if you have, it doesn't need to be the glue. Let me see if I can get a similar sound with Compressor Plus, and that's kind of what I've been experimenting with lately. I don't use these because this actually pulls away from some of the other frequency ranges. I also don't usually use this, but let's see if we can get a similar kind of louder sound with this. So, holy shit, I didn't even do anything. Wait, what? Wait, what? Did that all happen just from the EQ? Oh, okay. It was from crushing the over. So let's try that again. I was like, what? So within this, we can back off the ratio. See how I got a similar sound just from pushing the input up? You can do like both to where you're doing both both upwards and downwards compression. So something kind of like this. I don't really find that to be necessary, to be honest. Although you can, but yeah, that sounds just fine to me. So once you have that, then we can add the vinyl again. A little bit much, but I will say that it brings out the rides a little bit more with this, and so you know it's a different flavor. But if you have anything that is kind of like a vinyl or lo-fi effect plugin, RC20 is another good one that you can potentially use. You can actually make a lo-fi effect in the grid if you want. I think Polarity has a tutorial on that. Excuse me, but yeah, for me, this one. still kind of keeps it clean, but pushes those rides up a little bit more and kind of helps you give that more of a dirty sound to it. And then also changing the kits and all that stuff too will have a big impact. But that is kind of how compression can help with creating that wall of sound with this, because the aim and break, it's still pretty punchy, you know. It doesn't have like as much weight on the kick, but the transients actually have just like this really nice like smack, but not overbearing. But when you talk about changing all that and you're playing that through these and stuff, and then you get back to the drawing board with this, you can start to see how those flavors and whatnot are going to really affect the overall output of the sound. And so again, if we're coming back to that 85 thing, and then you start adding in, you know, some of your stuff that's like, I don't know, atmospheric or whatever. I'm really into that like 90s/2000s version of this kind of stuff. You know, just pads. Let me find some chords. I know I have some. There we go. So yeah, then we do something where we just toss this in here. Maybe do like some reverb, like ROM. Maybe some OTT. And I'm not going to start a track right now, but this is just kind of where this goes. You know, something kind of like that. We hit Command L. And then you can, you know, add your 808s and all that other stuff, but it's serviceable, you know. And if you still want to use the aim and break just for the little shuffle thing, you absolutely can do that. But I take a lot of pride in just making my own drums and stuff. Obviously, we don't have side chaining on this. That's a factor to consider. But yeah, they're usable, at least as a layer. And I kind of wanted to show you how to bridge into that by getting the pattern, talking about how to split the drum kit up into different channels. And then I know that we only process the entire break together, where normally I would do them individually, but I think that for the sake of trying to not overload you with too much information, you can get pretty far just by processing the entire kit, you know. And if you think about what the old DMB heads did back in the day, I don't think that they broke the loop up and did that individual processing initially. I think they were just like, let me take this entire aim and break and then distort it and see what that does, and then pitch it, and then, you know, I don't know, if somebody wants to fill me in on the history of that, you're more than welcome to, but I'm not really too concerned about it. So yeah, this is pretty much how I use Superior Drummer. All of the really heavy stuff that I use, like quote unquote live sounding drums for, this is the process that I do for it, regardless of if it's heavy, if it's jungle, if it's more of trip hop, whatever. This is the starting point and kind of how I get working with Superior Drummer without having to do too much. If you learned something, I would love it if you liked the video, and if you want access to a bunch of different breaks that I've personally made, both from a standpoint of drum and bass and jungle and halftime and all that stuff, I have a sample pack that I put out that's $25 for over 1,000 sounds, and you get like the best that I have to offer. So not only are you getting all different kinds of breaks and stuff, and a lot of different styles and flavors, but you also get things that are like my signature style of kicks and snares, and you know, some doofs. Then we have some of these guys. Just tons of variety. Then we also have some of this other stuff, which is like bass chops and whatnot as well. I'm more of a neuro guy, so that's in play. And then we also have some textures and stuff that you can kind of go through. Yeah, so thanks for listening to my advertisement. I appreciate it. But let me know if you all would like a masterclass on everything that I know about Superior Drummer. All of this stuff should, in theory, be inclusive to, or not exclusive to, Superior Drummer. You should be able to apply it to Addictive Drums or Easy Drummer or whatever it is that you have. It's more about the mindset of making everything really dry. And then, you know, techie and stuff, and focusing on that key element of getting the shuffles and whatnot. The composition aspect of it really is what matters. But yeah, I can still do that, and I might put it up anyways or something, but I'd like to know your thoughts if you have any interest in this. But thanks everybody. I really appreciate your time, and let me know what you all want to see next. See ya.